How's it going, everyone? My name is Bryce Newberger, and I am a youth ministry support specialist with Side by Side Counseling. And welcome to our youth mental health workshop, how to recognize when your students are not okay, understanding it, and what to do about it. So let me take you through. First of all, I'll finish introducing myself. I am Bryce Newberger. So as I said, I'm a youth and ministry support specialist. I'm also a youth pastor. Got my certification from Eternity Bible College by Francis Chan. I'm a certified trauma support specialist. I'm also certified in psychological first aid and strategic approach to suicide prevention. I work with local churches to make sure youth pastors and students are taken care of. I also work with young adults, a lot of college age young adults, also people just navigating their first marriage, their first child. I also do work with some older individuals as well who have kids of their own. So I've kind of been all over the spectrum, and I put together this youth mental health workshop because it's been on my heart. It's something I'm passionate about, and as someone who still volunteers my time at youth groups and interacts with students and young adults, I see how just necessary it is. And when I meet with youth pastors and ones who are very well theologically trained, on the mental health side, we've raised awareness on being more sensitive to the needs of students regarding these. And I think this training is something that you'll find, as myself, as I've been full-time employed as a youth pastor and run the summer camps and the big events and the Halloween parties and the Christmas parties and just dealt with the day-to-day and running small groups and training up volunteers, all of the day-to-day ministry stuff. As I've had my own personal experience with that, the goal of this training is to present it to youth leaders, volunteers, as well as youth pastors, and also interested parents who can gain benefit from this. Also, teachers, I feel like, who manage any sort of classroom can also use this knowledge as well to help them with better classroom management and awareness. So in this workshop, we're going to talk about what is trauma, the definition and how it works. We're also going to I'm going to teach you guys how to recognize when a student is traumatized, so physical signs you can see. And then, so what is trauma? What does it look like so you can recognize it? And then how to respond. So now that you've identified it, what do we do about it? And then lastly, we're going to end on the aftermath. What do we do long term? So now that we've kind of used that psychological first aid to treat it in the moment, how do we help students long term to help them with trauma over a long period of time so they can be less triggered and less traumatized in the normal day-to-day? So let's just start off with what and why. Trauma, what is it? Why does it happen? Really, I think it's an uncalculated cost of human experience. Living on this earth, they say no one gets through life unscathed. So we all have trials and tribulations. Students now more than ever are dealing with single parent homes, deaths in family. The COVID quarantine did a lot for our students' social anxiety and making friends. The social media is the true pandemic, I feel, of students not learning how to engage with others and how to cope and process in the real world. And so we're seeing all of these things, and just the culture war, more and more, we're losing ground there. And so students are more likely to get involved in sex and drugs and be traumatized by the sin of this world. So what is trauma? Here's a few quotes that I thought were pretty useful. I originally heard these quotes from the Arizona Trauma Institution. So trauma is an overwhelming demand placed upon the physiological human system. I like that one from Dr. Robert Macy. Trauma is an overwhelming demand placed upon the physiological system. So your body is going through something, and the demand that your body is needing to meet for what it's going through is overwhelming. It's too much. And so we'll talk about the physiological implications and symptoms of trauma. Trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. That empathetic witness is an important piece. Today, I'm going to teach us how to be an empathetic witness in a way that is clinically supported to help with trauma. And then trauma is feeling God-forsaken, cut off from the human race. Trauma is about trying to forget, hiding how scared, enraged, or helpless you are. Okay, the Bessel van der Kolk. So let me introduce you guys to this topic that's going to be very important for our work within recognizing trauma. Understanding when you go to a hospital, they're going to hook you up to all sorts of leads like EKG, and you're going to hear the beeping, and it's keeping you begin to see the lines go up, right? And it's in all the dramas and even comedy sketches that we do of hospital work. The reality is, we're monitoring where you are within a spectrum. So if your blood rate's too high, if it's too low, that's going to cause problems. It's going to raise an alarm. Well, unfortunately, with mental health, we have this thing known as the range of tolerance, but we can't really hook up any leads, or leads aren't hooked up to us throughout our day-to-day life. So we can't get that EKG kind of monitoring of where you're going. But you have ups and you have downs. You have things that excite you and you have things that suppress you. And so these are just normal everyday stressors, dealing with traffic, dealing with, for students, it's going to be homework or waking up early or dealing with peer pressure or, a sport that they might be involved in, or they have a boyfriend or girlfriend and there's drama there. There's always drama. And so these are normal stressors of everyday life. They go up and they go down. This is normal human experience. You can't live a life without any stressors. It's just not a thing. Our body's designed to perceive a stressor and deal with that stressor. And so we have this threshold and this upper range of tolerance. And as we go up, because we see a stressor and a stressor, when we think of stress, we can think of something just inherently toxic. Oh no, I'm so stressed. But the reality is stressors are quite mundane. If I'm driving down the road on the freeway and the person in front of me hits their brake lights, they don't even have to slam on their brakes. I just see brake lights kind of come up suddenly. That's going to be a stressor. My body's going to recognize that. And so I'm going to mitigate the incoming crash in front of me, and I'm just going to hit on the brake. It's not a big deal. So I'm just going to hit my brake a little bit and go back to driving. Everything's fine. But that is a normal stressor. There's nothing wrong with that. It's normal. So we operate within this range of tolerance. But what happens with people who are undergoing trauma for a long period of time, or they've had something traumatic, let's say their dad walked out on the family, or their mom's gone, or their pet just died, or they had a girlfriend or boyfriend who they were severely infatuated with for, let's say, a year to a week, I don't know, and they broke up. Whatever the case may be, however the individual is designed to respond to that threshold begins to move up. And when that threshold moves up, but the stressors don't necessarily change, something might have happened that was severe that caused the threshold to go up, but the day-to-day, everyday life, that hasn't changed. Well, what we see is that as that threshold closes, normal things where you would have had some breathing room within your normal range of tolerance, you're now operating outside of the range of tolerance. And so this is why it's so important to know this, because anytime you have a large gathering of students, whether that be at a youth group or, typical church on Sunday or a classroom or some sort of sporting event, students, right? We know students are going to have issues where they either act out or there's something wrong with them. We're seeing a behavior problem. And a lot of times we see stuff that's quite normal and we just think, well, why are they reacting this way? This is not a big deal. There's no, why did you create this problem for yourself? And that might be true for some students, but for many students, it is that they're just going through everyday life, but they've got home stress or work stress, or when I say work, I mean homework stress, school stress. They've got something going on in their lives, something extra or outside of the norm that has caused their threshold to rise. And now they're consistently going outside of that upper range of tolerance. So stressors don't usually change. The threshold shrinks. And so your body, when you're going up, as I talked about, I'm driving in traffic and I see the brake lights in front of me. So what do? I hit my brakes. So I avoid a wreck. No big deal. But if I'm driving at a pretty much a normal, everyday pace, and then there's a car accident in front of me, well, my body's going to freak out. It's going to, if I'm operating correctly, my body's going to send up a huge red flag, red alert, and I'm going to slam on my brakes quickly so I don't wind up in the car pileup. Well, our body is designed to have this kind of tension of raising awareness of some problem, mitigating that problem, and bringing us back into a normal range of tolerance. So we see tension there, like pulling on a string that goes both ways. We're going to see some tension there of, okay, something's happening. Okay, we need to calm down, and there's this perfect tension. Now, this is when we're triggered, right? And when we're going beyond the threshold, beyond our upper range of tolerance, right? We would call that acute stress. This happens when we are quote unquote triggered, right? This means that we've gone above that line. And so as I was just talking about that tension that we experience, the body and brain is designed to help us succeed and maintain balance. So slamming on my brakes in traffic when there's a wreck in front of me, that's maintaining balance. There's a problem, and my body usually subconsciously gives me the solution in a lot of ways to fix that problem so we can get back to normal and not have any sort of, car wreck or horrible thing. So that's balance, and that's good. Our body and brain is designed to help us succeed and maintain that balance. But when we experience or perceive a stressor, fight or flight kicks in an attempt to maintain that balance, right? So slamming on my brakes, that's gonna be adrenaline or noradrenaline, which is causing my body to react and slam on that brake in time. All right. So if there is a bear, then I hope my flight hormones kick in. I hope I get some adrenaline and I run from the bear. I hope noradrenaline doesn't kick in and make me fight the bear, because that would be a bad response from my body. But either way, we experience or we perceive a stressor, and fight or flight kicks in to attempt to maintain the balance. This is how the body's designed. This is not outside of the norm. This is how God designed us. So but whenever we do that, it decreases the body's maintenance functions to shift and focus on survival. So, for example, your immune system will shut off when your body is within its fight or flight mode. Your body's like, we don't have time to fight off a cold. We need to fight off a bear. So your body doesn't care about fighting off the cold or the flu or whatever diseases out there. And instead, it's going to shift all of its resources to more practical, right now in the moment energy to deal with what's in front of you. So we have this concept of, and again, this comes from the Arizona Trauma Institute, the stream of awareness. So when we have that perfect tension, we're operating within our window, we're alert, we're focused, we're attentive, we have good executive functioning, we can logic and reason, and we can communicate effectively. But there's hypoland, right, which is, or there's hyperland and hypoland. So when you're hyper, you're going to be restless, edgy, avoidant, aggressive, angry, overwhelmed, impulsive, uneasy. There's a threat, there's a problem, you need to deal with it. You're scanning the room for where the problems are, you need to deal with it. In hypoland, you're going to be confused, not fully aware, blanking out, detached, struggling to move, dizzy, shutting down, emotionally numb. Let's see that you are trapped for a long period of time with, let's say, something that you can't manage, right? Like, let's say I'm as a kid, I can imagine times as a kid where I was forced to be in a situation that I didn't have control over. I couldn't just leave the room if I wanted to, and my body's defense mechanism was to dissociate. It was to blur me out, to detach me, to kind of remove me from the reality, and that's my body's normal, God-designed way to try and get me back to that stream of awareness. So I don't like what's going on. Let's control it this way. So we have this stream of awareness where we don't want to be in hyperland. We don't want to be in hypoland, though we might have a foot in there from time to time. Ideally, we want to get back to that stream of awareness: alert, focused, attentive, executive functioning, logic and reason, and effective communication. So when your body is sending you through these, I like to think of it as a turtle. So we have this in psychology. They have currently what is the predominant theory is the polyvagal theory. And so this ladder of regulation is how some people think of it, where you're climbing a ladder. My own personal take is I like to think of a turtle. So if you picture a turtle with a really long neck, that turtle's neck, and actually let me get there we go. That turtle's long neck comes out of his shell. He's up. He's looking around. He wants to see He wants to see what's going on. He's exploring. So that is the ventral vagal complex, the top of the polyvagal, the multiple vagal theory. Your ventral vagal complex is where you are signaling. It's a signaling system for motion, emotion, and communication. So it's the social engagement system. Here, you're going to be assertive, self-reflective, self-evaluating, learning. You're going to build stable relationships, consistent boundaries, resilient. And it's important to know that play and creativity happen here. So big thing for youth pastors is we always have a game. There's always a game to play a lot of times. And we see students aren't engaging with the game. Now, it could be because they're moody, hormonal teenagers, but it's data. If they're not playing, a student never engages. It's not a smoking gun. It's not like they're not playing, they're traumatized, let's take care of them. But it's worth noting in a mental file that you should keep in your head, right? Okay, this student's not engaging. I would say if you're worried about a student, but then you start dodgeball or something and they jump into that game and they're playing, they're laughing, they're having fun, well, that's good. That means that they're in their ventral vagal complex. They're they're a long neck turtle. Now, if a turtle sees some sort of threat or some sort of stressor, right, their neck's going to withdraw in, maybe not all the way. I almost like to picture like a ninja turtle, right? He's got this like boxing stance. He's ready to fight anything. His arms are up. This is your sympathetic nervous system, right? I call it the peking turtle. This is your mobilization for flight or for fight or flight adaptations. This is your action and defense system. So here, you're going to be aggressive, avoidant, controlling with anger, sarcasm, procrastination, moodiness, reactive. Why? Because you're on high alert, right? So you're not out, you're not exploring, your head's in. And so if you have students who are moody or aggressive or when they check out of things, it's usually met with like heavy sarcasm. You're like, whoa, where did that come from? What's wrong with your attitude? This is a kid who is most likely in their sympathetic nervous system, so the middle rung. So that turtle's head kind of comes in. He's not exploring. He's not investigating. He's not, playing with creativity. He is on threat alert. And then lastly, we have our dorsal vagal complex when you're like just a shell, just a little shell. This is immobilization system for conservation and withdrawal. This is your passive defense system. So dissociating, withholding opinions, thoughts, feelings, and ideas, seeking to be smaller and less noticed, emotionally shut down. So if you're preaching a sermon and you go to a pretty serious topic. Let's say you're preaching on dating and relationships and you bring up divorce and you see a young girl in the front row whose family's going through a pretty vicious divorce and she kind of shuts down. Again, it's not a smoking gun like, oh, she's traumatized, I've done something wrong. She could just be really in tune with the message and kind of processing it. But it's data, right? This is data to follow up with them and get more data after the sermon, whether it's you or one of your youth volunteers, to see how they're doing and see if they were just in tune with the sermon or did they have a shutdown? Are they in their dorsal vagal complex? Are they just a shell, right? So this is mainly we're going to get more to practical application here in a bit. But bird's eye view right now, we're just talking about what trauma does to the body. This is how your body reacts to a trauma response. So what happens when triggered? We're going to get a little scientific here, and then I'm going to bring it down to practicality, but I want to give you guys the scientific overview of some of this. So the hypothalamus activates your adrenals. So adrenals, when you're having adrenals go through your system, it's going to constrict your tensor tympani muscle, which is like right about here. It's going to cause tunnel vision or blurry vision. It's going to impact your inner ear for equilibrium and balance. And this might seem too highbrow. Trust me, I'm going through this for a reason. It has a very, very real world, like grassroots, down to earth interpretation value for you. So stick with me. The inner ear impacts hearing. It causes higher tones to be harder to hear, lower tones to be more tolerable. So when I was a young youth pastor and I was losing students' attention, I used to preach louder by almost like, and then Jesus, he said this thing. And really what I was doing, I was like trying to wake up the students and get them to pay attention because I was afraid I was losing them. But if a student's triggered, the higher tones are actually more dulled. They can't hear them. So going on, even for my preaching style, I've started to add more like in like whispers, like, and then Jesus said. Bring that microphone close. So a little practical application there. Students who are going through, when they're triggered, they're going to hear lower tones better than they hear higher tones. Then the lungs dilate, rapid shallow breaths. The heart rate and blood pressure is incited. The hands tremble, become numb as blood rush to the heart. The face and neck redden as the circulatory system centralizes. Your muscles are going to tighten up. You're going to have muscle tensions, which if you're traumatized for a long period of time, triggered for a long period of time, you're going to have aches, pains, body aches, and possibly headaches from that muscle tension. Stomach and liver interactions. The liver stops producing bile and produces glucose for energy. That's going to give you more energy. However, the stomach is also going to stop digestion, causing an upset stomach. And over long periods of time, this can cause weight gain or weight loss based on the whole digestion issue in the individual. And the bladder controls are suppressed. So a reason why that can be important is when you are no longer triggered, it's going to be time to pee, which we'll go into how that can be an interesting little indicator. And then inflammation, your body is inflammation. So when you have an injury, your body has inflammation to clot the blood. But if you're not bleeding, then instead it settles into the joints as arthritis. It impacts your sleep, and it further impacts that digestion. Again, weight management, either weight or loss. So weight gain, weight loss. So why do I go through all of that? Well, I gave you all that, so now we can recognize trauma. This is how to recognize when a student is traumatized. So this will be our second module. Let's just dive right on into this. So I'm going to get another high-end, your ventral vagal nervous system in dysregulation. These are the 10 channels of the ventral vagal system. Please forgive me for the high-end science, but again, I promise you we are getting to very, very practical things. So I want to err on the side of giving you too much information than not enough, okay? These are part of the autonomic nervous system and are associated with the parasympathetic branch, specifically that ventral vagal complex. These channels include facial muscles, which control facial expression and eye movements, allowing for social communication and connection. Vocal cords, that governs vocalizations, including speech, tone, and prosody, which are important for effective social interaction. Heart rate regulates heart rate variability, which is linked to stress response and emotional regulation. Lungs, in terms of breathing, influences breathing patterns and the ability to regulate stress responses through breath control. Throat muscles, which affect swallowing and voice, which can impact social connection and communication. The ears, specifically the inner ear muscles that controls the ability to hear human speech and tune out background noise, aiding in social engagement. The digestive system influences digestion as the vagus nerve helps in the regulation of the gut-brain connection. The pupillary reflex regulates pupil dilation, which is influenced by emotional and stress responses. The neck muscles affect posture and head movement, which can reflect emotional states. And the diaphragm, it plays a key role in regulating the breath, essential for calming and social connection during stress. These channels are involved in the regulation of the social engagement system, promoting safety, connection, and emotional balance through the physical and physiological responses. So we get into this high end. Let's bring it down to earth. So here's what this looks like. Facial muscles, vocal cords, heart rate, lungs, throat, ears, digestive system, pupillary reflex, neck muscles, and diaphragm. Look, everything goes to the center of your body. Picture a nervous system like a spine, right, running down. Everything goes to the center of your body, specifically in the face and neck region, in the chest, and in the gut. So knowing that is that when we're looking for signs of trauma, when you're looking for signs of, is a student triggered? How are they handling the stuff? A lot of times, like I said, like when you're just watching students and you're preaching a general message, there's going to be kids who are they just don't want to be there. Their parents made them come. They're not really into it. And it's not that they're traumatized. I need to take care of them. But a lot of times as youth pastors or youth leaders, we know the story behind the student. We know what's going on in their life. And so these are ways that we can watch closer. There's a group of students that I work very closely with. They're going through some significant family trauma. In a recent message I watched preach to them, I knew that it was going to hit them closely, so I watched closely to see how they were responding. And specifically, I was looking around the face and neck region. I was looking to see how they were breathing within the movement of their chest. I was looking to see if they got up to use the restroom. These are the tells, right? So these are how we recognize and see whether trauma is triggered or not. So the visual symptoms you might see this again. You're going to see postural changes in students no matter what, because they're restless. My point is, if you know the story behind the student, which hopefully you do, then this will be more significant data. So they might lean forward with the head in their hands or self-soothing or grounding. So let's say the student in particular with significant family trauma, during the sermon, when the pastor said certain things that I thought, okay, this kid, this is the number one thing on his heart and mind right now. This weighs on his soul. So when it hits that part of the sermon, does he keep his posture the same? Or when the words are said, does he lean forward with his head in his hands? Does he lean back in his chair, distancing? So the self-soothing or balance or whatever, if your student is being significantly hit by this, you will see them most likely lean forward and dissociate, or lean back to try and distance themselves from the message. So you might see that they're flushed or have rapid chest movement. So the face or neck redness from vasodilation. I noticed a really easy tell is when people are stressed. For a lot of people, especially if they're really pale complected, their neck will turn red. And even without their face could be normal, kind of pale complected, but their neck will flare up. So this can be that's that increased heart rate, that increased blood flow moving to the central system. Eye movement, they might be unfocused or glaze over, or they could have a rapid eye movement, looking around the room, scanning for danger. They become more agitated, more fidgety. So fidgeting and numbness, which again, foot tapping and hand fidgeting, or numbness in their extremities. So they might, again, that has to do with their posture, what are they doing with their hands. So these are ways that you can see if you're preaching a message that you know is a little bit more intense. It's not just happy-go-lucky kind of David and Goliath, run-of-the-mill flannel graph sermon. You're going to get into real stuff, whether it's sexual abuse or drug abuse, or the Bible stance on purity, or whatever, like gender, whatever, or excuse political, whatever the case may be. And you're worried about students because you know their stories. These are some visual symptoms you can keep an eye out for. So this also can cause behavioral issues. So let's talk about the behavior. When triggered, the body releases either noradrenaline or adrenaline, which is influenced by the personal history of the individual. So do they get adrenaline, which is that flee or fawn response, or do they get noradrenaline, which is that fight response? So it depends on the student, depends on their biology, it just depends on nature and nurture. There's a lot that goes in there. So for that fight response, they're going to get a surge in noradrenaline, which shifts emotion towards anger and hostility. Students may feel anger at the sermon or God, but struggle to articulate or understand why, or they may use sarcastic humor at the wrong moment. So, you got the students in the front row, you're preaching, and they're always a problem. They're bothering their friends. They're making jokes at the inappropriate moment. It could just be a student who doesn't understand good social cues. But again, it's data. If you know that student's story, you know what's going on in their life. Let's say their dad has walked out on the family, and you are preaching on how God's a good father, and they begin to react sarcastically or bother their neighbor. It's not just about controlling them in the moment. That's good data for their small group leader to follow up with them later and check in with them. Are they okay? Is everything going good? So they could have a flee or a fawn response. So if you get a surge in adrenaline, it'll shift your emotion towards withdrawal or surrender. So that withdrawal, that flight response, the flee response, students may withdraw from the sermon, becoming moody or distracted or zoning out. They may get up to get water or use the restroom, or hyper-focus on unrelated tasks as coping mechanisms, cell phone use, or bothering their neighbors. So if you trigger a flight response in a student, let's say you're going to preach on something like sexual abuse. That comes up in a sermon, and there's a young girl who has dealt with that in her life, and you think this sermon is for her. Like, even when you wrote the sermon, you were thinking about, man, I really want to reach this student. And as you do it, you begin to see her eyes glaze over, and she begins to become just like zoned out or distracted. Maybe after the sermon, she's moody. Well, you might have gone too far. You might have written that sermon specifically for the student, but she wasn't in the right creative mindset to be open and explore that. And she's now in just a shell mode or peaking turtle mode. And so this is a way to recognize that. So you can follow up later with the student and maybe do more work in either a pastoral counseling session or just in a small group session, whatever the case may be. But just know, if you kind of see some of these things, you can follow up with the student and see if your sermon actually landed, or did you just trigger the student and it wasn't good. And that doesn't mean your sermon was a waste. There could have been a student who is not as severely affected, that your sermon just hit them right where they were at, right? But the one student that was on your heart, you missed them. And we don't want to miss that lost sheep, right? We all have a heart for that one lamb from time to time. I know sometimes when I'm writing sermons, there are one or two students that I'm like, this sermon is for that person. I don't tell them, but I'm like, as I'm preaching, I'm like looking at them being like, are you, get off your phone. Are you listening to me? Then there's the fawn response, which is kind of confusing with the fawn response. Students might seem deeply engaged, but their triggered state prevents them from making lasting changes or commitments. So they might lie or falsely agree to avoid confrontation. So you could preach that sermon and you think it hits exactly as you want. The student who's got the toxic boyfriend, you know, all of that. And they're like, oh, and then like they look zoned out or whatever. And then you follow up with them. Hey, like, what'd you think of that sermon? They're like, it was great. It was everything I needed. And then they don't break up with the boyfriend. They don't have any lasting life change. And you think, dang, I thought I got through to them. Well, maybe you didn't. It could also have been that you just triggered a fawn response. You went too hard on your sermon, too hard on your analogies, and the student's not making lasting life changes, even though they're responding favorably to your sermons. Why? Because it's not actually that they're agreeing. It's a fawn response. It's not a true lasting change. So these are why this is helpful information for us. So why are your students acting out? We got into some of that, but let's get into some of the nitty gritty. Really, it's their body finding balance, right? Okay, it's their body finding balance. So you have this process in biology known as homeostasis, and that's the body's ability to regulate and balance itself. And this is the process of homeostasis for an emotional wound. So we'll just call that an emotional wound. If you get a paper cut, you're gonna go, ow. And you're going to suck on it. You're going to put a Band-Aid on it. You're going to clean the wound, whatever the case may be. And then your body is going to kick into reaction on its own. The first part is just sucking your finger. You're like, ow, ouchies. But then after that, not the cleaning and all that, which we actively do, but your body is going to clot the wound. It's going to grow new skin. It's going to increase, the white blood cell count, whatever the case may be. I'm not a doctor, but it's gonna achieve homeostasis. Well, emotional wounds, your body's designed to seek homeostasis for emotional wounds as well. So that emotional wound can be, like I said, a sermon topic that's extremely triggering, or an interaction with another student who, let's say everything's good with the student, you've done nothing wrong, but then some jerk student's like, oh, you gained weight, to some poor girl, and it's like, why would you say that, you idiot? And we don't catch a lot of the stuff that goes through texts and phones and social media. But the homeostasis phase, the wound is guarded by defensiveness, by aggression, or avoidance. So the number one step is they're either going to get defensive, aggressive, or they avoid. So we're going to see that manifest in sarcasm, anger, moodiness, zoning out, pretending to pay attention, but being mentally distracted. All these things we were just talking about. So I was talking about just visual signs that we're going to see how their body's reacting, whether it's the color of their neck or the rapid breath movements or the posture of their body. But now we're going to go on to emotional behaviors, right? So and we got into some of that preemptively: sarcasm, anger, moodiness. Then they're going to have an inflammatory response, just as your body has inflammation to clot the wound. Emotionally, you're going to become self-protecting, or self-protecting becomes hypervigilance or hypovigilance, back to that stream of awareness slide, right? So hypervigilance, that overreactive response, is going to be excessive watchfulness, scanning the room, or being overly sensitive to tone or content, overreacting to minor stimuli, like being like disproportionate anger or fear. So this student might start acting out either in the crowd, or they're going to try and leave the room and fight with someone. Well, I'm just, a girl's back. I just have to use the restroom. Leave me alone, And maybe they do. Again, none of this is a smoking gun. It's a holistic look at the whole body. You get all of the information and you build a case and you react accordingly. Hypovigilance, underreactive response. This is going to be emotional numbness, withdrawal or dissociation, appearing checked out, or physically present but emotionally absent, minimal reactivity to events around them. So, you might tell a joke that everyone laughs at, and the student might normally laugh at your jokes, but now they're just not acknowledging you. You might increase your voice in, sometimes youth pastors especially, we're like, bam, in our sermon or something, like, my mom hit the vacuum. And all the students, kind of go up and, whoa, and the student might just not even react to that. So it's data that we can get. And Then they go to a proliferative phase. That's self-regulation and self-care skills are learned. So this is where we get to behavior. New patterns replace old ones. Acting out during the sermon, scrolling on your phone, getting up to get water. You know what I mean? Youth pastors, you're like, do you need water right now? I'm only preaching for 25 minutes, which sometimes becomes 50 minutes, but please just stay in your seat and don't get up and use the restroom or get water. But they're going to get up all the time. Why? Because these are self-regulation and self-care skills. It's not just that they're bored. Some students, it could just be that they're bored and they lack discipline. But for some students, getting up and getting water, going out and using the restroom, these are behaviors, these are patterns of behaviors that they're doing to try and solve the problem. And they might not even be aware of it. Their body's just kind of feeding them like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable in this sermon. Let me get up with a good excuse. Well, what are the number one excuses? Well, I have to use the restroom or I need a drink of water. For some reason, getting a drink of water has become a valid excuse in this day and age. And then after this, they either relapse back to step 1, 2, and 3 over again, going back through, anger, moody, zoning out, going back through disproportionate anger or whatever the case may be, and then new behaviors. They either stay in this cycle over and over and over, or they get to the maturation phase, which is the wound closes, they process it, and they build healthy life skills that help them hear things and not be so easily triggered. So if students don't gain a mature, nurturing, stable relationship through a small group leader or a youth pastor or a parent involved, whatever the case may be, another older student or some sort of, if they don't get a good, mature, nurturing, stable relationship that's going to help move them past that proliferative phase, they don't get someone to help them move past that stage, they're going to stay in that cycle over and over and over. Their self-regulation, the way that the body's designed, is literally they will just go hemostasis phase, inflammatory phase, proliferative phase, hemostasis phase, inflammatory phase, proliferative phase. They're going to be stuck in there unless a youth pastor helps them get out, unless another student helps them get out, unless a youth leader helps them get out, unless a parent helps them get out, or unless they get advice from TikTok or social media. They're always getting information from somewhere that's going to influence the maturation phase. The problem is that if you're not giving it to them, then it could come from a student who's a bad influence or social media, which is never a good influence. And so they might get past some of these phases, but not in a healthy, good, or balanced way, which is why we want to be proactive on these things. So these reactions, though, I want to point out are natural and part of God's human design. Okay, they're natural and they're part of God's human design. So as I said, your body is designed to find balance. It's designed to help itself. So naturally, these reactions, whether they're good or bad, and what we want to do as youth pastors, as youth leaders, as teachers, as parents, we want to get them through these things in productive, healthy ways. But just know, even if they're picking up bad habits, it's still part of God's design. Bryce, it's part of God's design for them to do bad habits. No, the system that God has designed, which is working, is accessing toxic traits, and we want to give them good traits. But it is important to know that these reactions are natural and part of God's human design. So how do we respond? How do we become that empathetic witness that I talked about, that mature, nurturing, stable relationship? Okay, so how do we do that? So I'm going to give you guys some trauma first aid. Okay, so how to respond to traumatized students, some psychological first aid. So things you can do in the moment to mitigate the trauma so they can go get, professional help if it's very severe, or longer lasting help as time goes on. So first of all, as I was saying, we need an empathetic witness, and we're going to talk about how to be that empathetic witness. So because trauma makes us feel cut off from humanity, we need an empathetic human to witness our trauma and help us process it. So a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, right? A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. If a man falls down without friends, who's there to pick him up, right? So within the Bible, and it's not good for man to be alone. So we have this biblical principle laid out in our design and through our Bible that it is not good to be alone. We need other humans to help us. Not even God himself is alone. He's a unit. He's a trinity. So when people are cut off from humanity, and trauma isolates, it withdraws, it makes you feel alone, cut off, God-forsaken, going all the way back to that quote. So we want to be an empathetic human witness to come in and witness the trauma and help them process it in a valuable way. Now, for significantly traumatized people, you're going to refer them to a counseling service. You're going to get them help, right? I'm not asking you to necessarily process all of their trauma with them, especially if it's super severe. We are, and a lot of youth pastors, you are theology experts, not necessarily trauma experts, right? So reminding you guys, what is happening here is that their threshold has raised, and so their stressors are going past their upper range of tolerance. And these stressors can be normal things. So I want to call that back to your mind, because the question becomes, well, if the threshold is raised, how do we lower that threshold? How do we increase their range of tolerance so that normal everyday things are not triggering to them, so they can sit through a sermon or play a game or sit in a social circle and not lose their minds? Okay, so we want to lower the threshold. So we're going to recognize the range of tolerance is closing. We're going to bring awareness within our own brain. Okay, that's what's happening. Let's keep in mind, if this seems like a really weird reaction, hey, I just said hi. I just asked them to play a game. I just asked them to sit down. Why are they freaking out? Okay, normal stressors, but triggered responses, that range of tolerance is closing. So detect what in the environment may be triggering. Hey, you asked a student to come sit down. A big one these days is loud music. That's become a very popular one with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, where it's like, hey, like, it's worship time. Why aren't you going into the auditorium and worshiping? Well, it's too loud, And for some of them, it's like, I think you're just looking for an excuse to sit out here and text your boyfriend or girlfriend. For others, is it actually triggering? Let's figure out. So detect what in the environment may be triggering to them. Let's set them aside. Let's help them self-regulate, calm, relax, and reduce body arousal. And then we're going to go repeat steps 1 through 3 until everything is good. When I was an IT tech doing computer virus repair, I used to run an antivirus scan, an anti-malware scan, and we'd run it. It would catch some of the viruses. Then we'd say, yes, eliminate the threats. And then we would reboot the computer and run the virus scan again, because sometimes there was layers of viruses and it had to remove the first few so that the antivirus or the malware detector could detect something deeper down. Same thing. We're going to recognize the range of tolerance is closing. We're going to detect what in the environment may be triggering. We're going to self-regulate, calm, relax, and reduce body arousal. Then after that reboot, we're going to recognize if the range of tolerance is still closed. Detect what in the environment may still be triggering. We're going to self-regulate, calm, relax, and reduce body arousal. Rinse, repeat. So I'm going to take you guys through how do we self-regulate, calm, relax, and reduce body arousal? What practical steps? It's easy to say, but what practically do we do? So let's get into that. How to respond. We're going to observe quietly, avoiding direct attention to the individual. Okay, so you don't want to point them out in a crowd, is what it means. So you will give them one-on-one attention to approach them and help them regulate, but don't be like, this person's freaking out, everyone. Let's just calm down for their sake. Like, don't do that, right? So, and I think we all know that. So you're going to observe. So first of all, observe quietly. This is how you recognize that the window of tolerances or the range of tolerances is closing, right? So first you got to observe quietly. Don't point them out. If you're preaching in a sermon as a pastor, and like I said, there's that one student or two students that you're really thinking about for that sermon that week, and so let's say you're paying special attention to that student, and they're never aware of it. You just kind of glance in their rough direction from time to time, seeing if they're listening, and you begin to see some of these things. Well, continue your sermon, right? And then after the sermon, follow up with them. You're going to create a safe, non-judgmental space for processing after the sermon. So you're going to follow up with them. Hey, are you okay? Or their small group leader. Ask their small group leader, hey, did you see that? Like, follow up with them. And then you're going to offer, after you create that non-judgmental space for processing after the sermon, we're still going to get into what the practical steps for processing are. But after everything's said and done, you're going to offer follow-up support or referrals if needed. Hey, text me later on this week. Let's have a phone call later this week. Let's get coffee later this week, right? Talk to the parents. Hey, have you considered this counseling service, right? Maybe your kid should, go to side-by-side counseling. Whatever the case may be. schedule pastoral counseling, whatever the case may be, but follow-up support. So here's how we become an empathetic witness, all right? There's 8 steps. 8 steps we're going to go through, all right? We want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system is really what we're doing. That's a scientific term, if you're into that kind of stuff, to become an empathetic witness. So step number 1, you're going to make eye contact, right? Gently make eye contact with the student to convey empathy and presence. Avoid prolonged eye contact if it may feel overwhelming. So sometimes when I'm dealing with students in a pastoral counseling session, I'm making eye contact with them and seeing how they hold my gaze. Be smart, right? If it's too much, if they keep avoiding your gaze, right? Keep those caring, compassionate eyes to have that human contact, but also feel free to, as you then talk, like, well, I was, one thing to think about, and just kind of like let them off the hook with that eye contact. Bring it back regularly though, because that establishes that human witness, that human connection. You're going to model regulation. Okay. This is a big one, especially in sermons. I know I'm super guilty of this. I can be high strung and you need to slow down your pace. You can intentionally slow your speech or movements to model a regulated state. So you almost want to, channel Dash from Zootopia, right? Not that slow, but I almost have to, I'm already so animated and so vocal and so quick to speak that I almost have to think of something that exaggerated to slow myself down. Don't just jump in right the moment they're done talking. Slow your speech, slow your movements, slow your breath. Use nonverbal cues such as relaxed posture and open gestures. They can non-verbally signal calmness and safety. So you yourself model a calm person and their body will automatically try to match that. There's something within us where we help people co-regulate. So we want to gently validate their emotions. I understand some topics we discuss may be deeply personal or challenging. And this is one you can use from the stage, right? You can say, if that's you, so you can, let's say you just talked about death or divorce or sexual abuse, something big from the stage, and you go, uh-oh, I might have triggered some of my students. I might have gone too far in my example, or you told a story that you thought was not that big of a deal, and then you're like, they're not responding the way I want them to respond. Even from the stage, you can be like, hey, by the way, let's real quick, I understand some topics we discuss can be deeply personal and challenging. If that's you, take a deep breath and know it's okay to pause and process. You can even just call it out from the stage. But afterwards, too, you can have the same conversation with the individual, and you're going to use a calm tone and maintain a steady, warm, non-judgmental voice. The tone itself can signal safety. And remember, higher pitched tones, because that inner ear, they're not going to hear higher pitched tones. So speaking low, calm, you're going to get through to them a lot more easier. And then remind them to breathe. Let's take a moment to slow down with a deep breath and slowly breathe out. Hey, let's just breathe for a moment. I was dealing with a student who was dysregulated. And as he was kind of freaking out, I said, okay, he told me everything I was going. Hey, I said, hey, what's going on? What's going on? Well, I feel this, I feel that, I feel all these things. I feel. I'm okay. All right. Well, hey, I understand that. Those are some difficult feelings. Hey, you know what? Let's just take a second. Let's just breathe, you and I, let's just breathe for a second. And that can also be a helpful time for you to mentally review some of this content. All right, what am I going to say next? What am I going to do? But that excuse to take a moment and breathe is also time for you to gather your thoughts. You're going to encourage the student to notice something around them. Okay, let's just take a moment and breathe, okay? Right now, you and me. Okay, breathe. Whew. All right. All right, you know what? See those Christmas lights up there? Hey, do you see that tree over there? Let's point out some things. Let's the feel of the chair, the sounds in the room, or the temperature. Encourage the students to notice something around them. This is literally grounding them. Let's take a moment to notice something we see, one thing we hear, one thing we feel. Right? Getting them back in their body. Right? Their brain is out there in the ether, freaking out, and you're gonna bring them back down to earth. Normalize taking breaks. Hey, if you need a moment to step away, please feel free. This space is meant to support growth, not pressure. This allows the student to self-regulate without shame, as opposed to forcing them back to their seat. So if a student gets up, this one's important. If the student gets up and walks out to use the restroom or get a glass of water, I always like to have one of my leaders or if I'm not preaching, myself go out there and just check on the student. I'm just going to the restroom. Okay, cool. I don't even have to talk to them sometimes. Just seeing how they go to the restroom or how they're getting a glass of water can tell me a lot about them. But if they seem not okay, hey, what's going on? Oh, everything's good, but they're clearly not okay. You're seeing the redness in the neck. You're seeing the rapid breathing. You're seeing some of this data is coming together to build a case that they might not be okay, especially if you know the student's story and the sermon's going there. If you're, if you're a volunteer or you're not preaching that week, you'd say, hey, you know what? You don't have to go in right away. Like, you don't have to just run back to your seat. Let's talk, because they're going to get this. They're going to get the good stuff from the sermon really in the small group anyways. That's where we want to do all the heavy lifting. So what's really important for them is that in that moment that they get that empathetic witness, that they get that person who says, hey, it's not about the structure. It's not about the procedure. It's not about the organized fun we have going on. It's about you. Are you okay? You don't have to run back right away. Are you okay? Let's take a moment to just enjoy this space together. Let's just breathe. Is everything good? Right? So if you need a moment to step away, please feel free. This space is meant to support growth, not pressure. So then use humor or a lighthearted moment when appropriate, right? So if appropriate, share a positive or humorous anecdote, a little story, a funny thing to say. Laughter can help shift people through that nervous system into a calmer state and release that built-up tension. That turtle mode, it can bring them from a shell to their neck out, or from their peaking turtle mode to their long neck mode with a little laugh if you're good at it. And then you want to, of course, as youth pastors, as ministers, we want to integrate faith-based comfort, right? We want to throw in a Bible verse, whatever comes to mind. For, some of our youth leaders out there, they might not have all the Bible verses memorized, but just putting God in the mix can be good. Hey, you know what? Jesus loves you. Like, everything's good. And can we just pray real quick? So provide reassurance, share accompanying scripture or prayer that promotes peace and safety. Be still and know that I'm God, right? Encourage personal reflection. Close your eyes and picture yourself in a place of peace, knowing that God is with you and you are safe, right? Jesus sees you. He loves you. Everything's good. This is how we become an empathetic witness. So again, from beginning to end, we're going to make that eye contact. We're going to model regulation. So we're going to make eye contact. We're going to be ourselves. We're going to be calm. We're going to breathe. We're going to validate their emotions. Hey, I get it. This stuff can be heavy. Let's just take a breath. All right. Let's ground ourselves. Let's look around real quick. Okay, that tree is kind of cool. Like, oh, look at someone left their Gatorade out. That's funny. Anyways, don't feel like you have to run back in there, right? Just let's take a moment and let's just check in with ourselves. How we doing, right? Okay. Let's be honest, that pastor kind of preaches long anyways, so we could use a little break. All right. Well, you know what? Let's get you back in there, but first I want to tell you, Jesus loves you. And that everything's going to be fine. Let's pray real quick. Thank you, Jesus, for being here with us. Thank you for just sharing your heart with us, Lord. Open our eyes and our ears to receive whatever truth you have for us. And just help us ultimately, Lord, know that you love us. All right, cool. How you feeling? All right? Still good? If not, we can go okay, let's take a second. Let's talk, right? Sometimes you could have a really good talk there. Otherwise, it's like, all right, let's get you, sometimes students take advantage of that. It becomes an every week thing, and you probably just miss some of the cues and they're taking advantage of you. Maybe not. Or maybe it's a sign that that's when you need to refer them to pastoral counseling with you during the week or a counseling service, depending upon the severity of the trauma. So, and then get them back in, right? So that's how we become an empathetic witness. So again, just to remind you, it's going to take them through that turtle syndrome. Now, what's interesting is you can't go from in your shell to just having your neck out. Just the same way as it's a ladder, you can't go from the bottom of the ladder to the top of the ladder. So know that if they're just a shell, they might go through being withdrawn to aggressive, right, or sarcastic before you get them back to play and creativity. So don't expect going from complete shutdown to laughing and everything is good. When I say throw in that little bit of humor, if it's appropriate, they might give you a nervous chuckle. It might turn into, something a little bit still defensive, but we're getting there, right? So I just want you to know, don't expect them to go from completely shut to completely open. It doesn't work that way. They've got to go through each system before they're back at the top of play and creativity. So you cannot become a long neck turtle without first being a peaking turtle. So dissociating, withholding opinions, thoughts, and feelings and ideas, seeking to be smaller, less noticed, emotionally shut down, then turns into aggressive, avoidant, controlling with anger, sarcasm, procrastination, moodiness, or reactive. And then it turns into assertive, self-reflective, self-evaluating, learning, stable relationships, consistent boundaries, resilience, play, and creativity. Okay, so you can't become a long neck turtle without being a peaking turtle. Okay, they're going to have to go through all the systems. So if a student's severely triggered or traumatized, they're having a severe reaction, don't just try to patch them up and throw them in the game. Hey, well, we are playing dodgeball right now though. So, get in there. It doesn't. So give them time to process, give them room to heal, take it slow, take it slow, take it slow. Becoming a long-necked turtle, you yourself, you can't help other people be a long-necked turtle if you're not a long-necked turtle. You cannot help someone else be an empathetic witness unless you yourself are an empathetic witness. So connect with at least one person who's consistently a long-necked turtle, right? And hopefully they're connecting with you, and you are consistently a long-necked turtle. But you yourself, you need some long-necked turtles in your life. I've got some great ones who, when I'm freaking out and I call them for advice, they're always in their long-necked turtle mode. My buddy Chris is always just like, well, that sucks. He's like, well, but, he's always just calm. Like, my reaction is like, oh, this thing is for this problem, this trauma, and I'm angry and the world is ending. And he's like, yeah. Well, yeah, that's not good. I feel bad for you, but I don't think the world's ending. I think everything's fine, So that's a long-necked turtle. I hope that we can also be that long-necked turtle. That's the goal, that empathetic witness. So to be a long-necked turtle, you need to connect with other long-necked turtles, but you also need assurance that those you are responsible for are safe, right? So if your kids are hurt, if your family's hurt, these are times where you might want to encourage youth leaders to take a step back from ministry. And really, it doesn't have to be long-term, but just encourage them, if anything, to make sure that they're going on dates with their spouse, right? That they're hanging out with their friends, that they're connecting in groups. All of this is just to make sure that they're in a safe place, that they're connecting with long-necked turtles, that they're connecting with community, family, or team, that we are united in response to common challenges and crises. So also with that becomes access to essential resources. As James says, if you tell someone to go eat, be filled, be warmed, you don't give them a coat, you don't give them food, you've done nothing for them. So as pastors as well, we want to make sure that we have practical resources for people, whether that be, I was talking to a family who their dad had just lost his job and they wanted to go to camp. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to find some people in the church to cover camp for you, right? Hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to connect you with the church's support team and get a meal train put together for you, or our financial peace classes. We're going to connect you to our essential resources. I'm going to connect you to a counselor. We're going to get you taken care of, and I'm going to follow up, and I'm actually going to care and be in this problem with you. So that's how we create long-necked turtles, and long-necked turtles are more long-necked turtles for people to connect with, and that's where that society of health and safety come from. So now we want to talk about defeating trauma. So we'll wrap this up with how to follow up with traumatized students and provide long-term care. All right, so this will be our fourth module. This is it, and then we're out of here. Okay, so defeating trauma, how to follow up with traumatized students and provide long-term care. So I'm going to get nerdy again. We're going to talk about pathogenics. And a pathological approach to care is pathogenics. This is what doctors do. You go to a doctor's office, he says, what's wrong with you? You're like, well, my arm hurts, my gut hurts, my back hurts, and my head hurts. And the doctor usually goes, okay, which one of those do you want to focus on first? They're going to go step by step of what's wrong with you, okay? So pathos comes from the Greek disease and suffering. The focus is always on the presenting problem or deficit. If your arm is broken, it needs a cast, right? If your stomach is upset, you need some Tums, right? If you have a urinary tract infection, you need some antibiotics. Okay, there's a problem and there's a solution. It's break, fix. The problem with this approach is it's a reductionistic paradigm, aiming treatments on the disease and responses on a problem. The characteristic of the individual that is being served is much less important. So the assumption is the problem is contained to a singular system. Stop the bleed, reduce the pain, return to status quo. Stop the bleed, reduce the pain, return to status quo. You're bleeding, clean it, get a Band-Aid, get back in there, right? So success is defined as the absence of disease or the problem is no longer presenting, okay? Starting point is what's your problem? What's wrong? What's wrong with you? So here's some typical pathological approaches to student issues. Student is engaging in self-harm. Okay, well, scream into a pillow, snap a wristband, and now the student's no longer engaging in self-harm. They always felt like snapping a wristband still kind of counts. It's just less severe, but it's still like inflicting pain upon yourself. But either way, we recommend that sometimes. Scream into a pillow, snapping a wristband. The student's no longer harming themselves. Success. Students are partaking in drugs, whether it's, illegal use of marijuana or vaping or whatever the case may be. Okay, well, let's restrict access to the drugs or the drug-related relationships. Bad boyfriend, bad friends, drug dealer, whatever the case may be. Okay, They can't access the weed anymore. They can't access the vape anymore. They can't access the drugs anymore. Success. Student is no longer partaking in drugs. Problem solved. Students are having sex. That's not good. Let's get the students to break off the sexual relationship, break up with the boyfriend, the girlfriend, whatever the case may be. The student's no longer having sex. Problem solved. The student is being disruptive during a sermon. Move the student away from friends. The student is no longer disruptive. Problem solved. So that's a pathogenic approach. Now, I'm sure as you guys are picking up as we go through this, there's a better way. There's a better way to deal with the problems of students. And so behind every troubling behavior and emotion is a set of unmet needs awaiting our attention, right? Behind the unmet needs is an unseen person awaiting our attention. So behind every troubling behavior and emotion is a set of unmet needs awaiting our attention. Some needs are not being met and they need attention. Okay. Behind the unmet needs is an unseen person. A person is not seen, so their needs are not met and they're waiting attention. I heard a alcoholic on social media. I read a post from an alcoholic recently. Alcoholic Anonymous guy. And he said, the problem was never the alcohol. Alcohol was the solution to all the other problems, and that was the issue. He's like, the issue wasn't that alcohol was the problem. The issue was that alcohol was my solution. If he stopped drinking alcohol, he still had all the problems. So he still needed a solution for those problems. So alcohol he used as a solution. So in the same way, we want to provide for people a understand what are their unmet needs, and understand that behind that unmet needs is an unseen person. So the problem isn't sex, drugs, self-harm, and disruption. The problem is a soul crying out for help to be seen, heard, and respected. And so this is why we're going through this module, through this training, is we want to understand, okay, there are students out there who are dealing with significant issues. They're dealing with significant problems. We want to see these students. We want to love these students. We don't want to just put a Band-Aid on it, right? And so there's this thing where there is a program to conform to, right? Play the game, sit in your chair, listen to the sermon, go to small group, answer the questions, get out of here, right? That's the format for most ministries. All right, show up, enjoy the check-in, get your little stamp, play the game appropriately without breaking anything and having fun, participate in worship, sit in your chair, listen to the sermon, go to your small group, answer the right amount of questions in the right way, and then get going. Now, there's not anything inherently wrong with that format, but when students aren't conforming, we start to think, well, if we just fix the problem, if I can just get them to behave or not disrupt, then they'll conform to the program. They'll play the game, they'll participate, they'll check in, they'll play the game, they'll participate in worship, they'll listen during the sermon, and they'll go to small group. Problem solved. But as we've seen, even with the fawn response, where they can be overly compliant but still heavily traumatized, and then not having lasting life change, they're not breaking up with a boyfriend, they're not stopping the drugs, they're not stopping the sexual addictions. How do we help them? We're all in this line of work because we love people, we love students, and we care too much about them to let them go on poisoning themselves. We want to help. And so that's why it's important not to take a pathogenic approach, because it's so systematized. Well, you're not inside the status quo. So that's the data. We have a status quo, participation, engagement. But because they're outside of that, well, that's data, yes, but getting back within the status quo is not the solution. The solution is being that empathetic witness so they can be seen, heard, cared for, loved, right? So when our help isn't helping, okay? So more focused on the presenting problem or the deficit rather than the underlying unmet needs. We have made the naive assumption that problems can be resolved with simple cause-effect treatments and interventions. We fooled ourselves into believing that if we stop the bleed and reduce the pain, that the status quo can be restored. We keep guilting and shaming people with the same ineffective question: what is wrong with you? And as someone who has run 6th grade small groups, I'll be honest, sometimes that's my first question. What is wrong with you? What were you thinking? But every time that I've dug deep, asked a student what's going on in their lives, and gotten more of the story behind, that's when I've gotten to know the student better, built that longer lasting, long-term relationship. And some of the best students I know didn't always pay attention well during the sermon, didn't always participate well during service, didn't always want to play the game. But because I understood the story and the need, and they knew that I saw them, that I loved them, that I was here for them, well into their mid-20s, we are still connected and loving one another and have built that strong, lasting relationship. So this is known as a salutogenic approach. We don't have to get too nerdy with it. I just threw it up here for you. Salus in Latin meaning health and wellness. It focuses on assets, competencies, capacities, and how to grow or enlarge them, right? We want to create pathways towards a sense of physical, mental, and social well-being. The assumption behind troubling behaviors, emotions, and thinking are unmet needs, fear, and an unseen person. The objectives: to improve or get better incrementally, to make the environment more predictable, comprehensible, and manageable, to function more effectively despite the adversities. Success is defined as increasing the range for managing the stressors in life and work. You can't get rid of the stressors. It's how we manage the stressors. As we were talking about, the stressors don't usually change. It's the threshold. So starting point is what's needed to feel safe, what is needed to build trust, what is needed to move forward towards transparency. Health is not the absence of disease, but rather the process by which individuals maintain their sense of coherence. So really, all of this workshop is put together so that we can see our students better, right? The Bible will say, he who has an ear, let him hear, right? My prayer always is, Lord, give me your eyes. Give me eyes to see students the way you see them. And sometimes we might just need a little bit of training and help. And I find that understanding some of this higher end mental health and how the brain works and the polyvagal theory and the range of tolerance, all of that, this can be used to make us better preachers, better youth leaders, run better small groups, and build better systems of health for our students. And just think of the way Jesus dealt with students, or students, the way Jesus dealt with everyone. Jesus didn't start with, hey, you're breaking the commandment, stop breaking the commandment, right? When he was dealing with a tax collector or a prostitute, he said, he focused on their needs. What's wrong? And he healed the need with, whether it was Zacchaeus or Mary Magdalene, right? Or Matthew, or whatever the case may be. Jesus saw them. And I love in scripture where Jesus at the party of Simon the tax collector says, look at this woman. He says, look at this woman. That's our charge from God. Look at these students, see them, help them. And I know you guys care because you tuned on in for this mental health seminar. Guys, I've been Bryce from Side by Side Counseling, and that is our mental health seminar for students. So I hope you guys have learned some things. If you want to do some work with me or consult with me on some of your more complex cases with your students, you can find me at sidebysideaz.com, and we can do some work together. And I can maybe help untangle a few knots or provide this training more specifically in person at your church, wherever the case may be. All right. God bless you guys. And keep feeding those lambs, right? Look at those students as Jesus asks us to. All right. Bye.